Good morning, Melanie.
Good morning, Derek. Good
How you doing?
afternoon, Derek.
Good afternoon. How you doing today?
Oh my God, I'm happy to be alive. I just had a brisk walk in the Arnold Arboretum. That was lovely. uh,
What's on your mind these days?
fine. Well, this has been an auspicious time, not just because things are blooming, but you turned 50 this year.
Did
I'm
did
excited about that. I love that. I love thinking about this next half century of yours that is just open because you really live well, Derek, and I'm inspired by it always. Um, and we've been wanting to talk about our lens on the topics of land, power, wealth from this perspective of our ages. I'm 4 years younger than you. We both firmly identify as Gen Xers. Um, we also experienced last year the 50th anniversary of the birth of hip hop. So, this is auspicious time to recognize ourselves at this stage of our lives and what have we learned and what has made us in the culture.
yeah.
Yeah. And how does that inform our understanding and our circumstances economically? Um, so yeah, what do you think about being 50 and hip hop being 50?
I don't usually connect the two.
Yeah.
I mean, yes, I know hip hop turned 50 last year, and I know I turned 50 this year. So I'm aware that we share a common age, but hip hop has just always been part of the background of my life, or part of the background of wherever I've been. And as I have been traveling, getting aging and traveling, I hear hip hop everywhere now. So
Mm.
it sort of seems like just a normal thing. Sort of how when people from the I'll say 1930s or 19, yeah, when 10-year-olds in the 1930s would hear jazz everywhere, it's probably just a normal thing for them. When
Mhm.
people in the 1800s would hear classical music everywhere, it's probably just normal for them. Like, to me, it's just the soundtrack of my life.
Mhm.
And um, I know I don't think of myself as being old. I know younger people probably would. I don't think of myself as being old. I don't feel old. I don't think I look particularly old. And so when I think of hip hop being 50, I'm like, oh, it's aging well. I feel like
Mhm.
it's aging well. I feel like it is infused in a lot of places, and not just physical places, but also in terms of mindsets and
Yeah.
actions and politics and a lot of things. So I feel like it's maturing in a way that offers some promise,
Yeah.
but also, I don't know. I don't know if people in our generation, Gen X, so Gen X, for those who may not really know, is, folks born between 1968 and 1981. And part of what I was thinking about before we started recording was, how are we doing? So hip hop is maturing well. Hip hop is everywhere. Hip hop is really becoming part of not just the US culture, but cultures globally. How are we doing as a generation? Like, are we maturing well? Are we achieving things in a way that shows us growing and becoming more involved and more capable in ways that we weren't 20, 30, 40 years ago? So this is kind of where my mind has been.
I appreciate that. And I think about that. Do those of us who are babies, little ones, when hip hop was getting off the ground, do we experience the benefits of how it has moved all around the world and changed culture and become big, 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 big business? It's really become the fabric of what American music is, American music culture is. You can't think of without hip hop at this stage. But how has that impact conveyed to those on the ground where hip hop was born? That's what I think about. Again, thinking about land, wealth, power. Hip hop came out of, in a lot of ways, dire circumstance and people talking about it and being resilient in it. And where are we? Where is that demographic now? That's yeah, a driving question for me. We have Yes, go
Well,
ahead.
just before you completed your last sentence, when you were saying hip hop has come out of, and we were waiting for that next
Mm,
word, I was thinking hip hop came out of a basement in the Bronx,
yeah.
and now hip hop artists are hanging out with presidents. And so just that contrast, I think, is really stark. And, just interesting to see, what kind of parallels are there. I mean, talking about a generation of people, we're talking about millions of people, so we can't all be hanging out with presidents, but do we at least have some upward trajectory generally? So that's kind of where my mind has been going.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you know me, I'm going to be cynical about it and be like, well, that's just capitalism. Of course, it can hurdle up such that there are a few standouts who get to hang out with presidents, but the culture, the milieu, the mindset, the circumstance that generated hip hop, are those folks getting more access? And I think we're both then asking the same question. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
We have a guest with us today to help us think about that. So excited to muse with him. Let me tell you about him. Independent journalist and content creator Gregory Ball has contributed to the Boston Globe, Boston Magazine, and the Bay State Banner. He is co-founder of KBX Media, a digital platform, and the director of digital strategy at Embrace Boston. Greg has also served on the board of the Boston Art and Music Soul Fest, and we're excited to talk with him today about media, music, and community engagement.
Hey, Greg.
Good morning / afternoon / whatever it is. I think my clock is telling on us. But good afternoon, whatever. Hello.
Good day.
How about that? Hello.
Greetings.
Good to see you. Good to have you on the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm looking forward to this conversation. So you guys don't know, Derek is one of my favorite coworkers that I've ever worked with in my entire life. He amuses me to no end. And because you know how somebody who is brilliant and they kind of know they're brilliant, and I just watch him navigate being brilliant around these people, and they don't know that he has been dealt. He's dealing with them on 2 or 3 different levels, and it amuses me
elegantly.
I need to have KBX Media represent me in different circles now, because that was a wonderful introduction, and you're the guest. So there's no need for you to introduce me. We need to be introducing you and your ideas.
Right.
Well, I just want to set the tone and let people know that the show is hosted by the creme de la creme of folks. I've just, even in our preparation, I was really looking forward to this conversation. So I'm excited to be here.
You.
Can we start with a simple question, Greg?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
Why talk about hip hop? What is it? Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
When we say hip hop, what do you think of, and what do you mean when you're talking about hip hop, and how does that relate to where we come from?
So when I think of hip hop, I think of hip hop as a cultural lens. I think each generation or subsequent generations all have their lens that they look at the world through. And I think that there was a jazz generation, there was a soul generation, there was a funk generation. There was all of those generations, and each one of those were very specific and very much a snapshot of the times that they were created in. So, when we talk about hip hop, it only makes sense that this music came from the poorest section of the most powerful city in the world at a time when all hell was breaking loose. You know what I mean? You got to think the Bronx was burning when hip hop was coming into fruition. And, many times we talk about, we have the 50th year of hip hop, but it's maybe those 5 years ahead of that kind of really sets the stage for hip hop to come into fruition. So I think that for me, it's been my lens that I kind of look at the world through. You know what I mean? For better and worse in some cases, but it is the way that I view the world and way I think about things. And even within hip hop in that 50 years, that has changed, because the hip hop of 79 to 89 is drastically different than the music of today. I was talking to somebody, a younger person, the other day, and if you're 30 years old, you can't think of a time when hip hop was not on the radio.
Yeah.
Not that it was just, that's if you're 30. If you're 40, you might be able to remember when it wasn't the dominant voice in pop culture, right? But if you are in your 20s, it's absurd to think that we had to wait until one particular day of the week on a Saturday afternoon to listen to the hip hop show to hear the new music that was coming out at this time.
Or how I honestly tear up when I think about, I remember where I was on my front porch in Paterson, New Jersey, in my Jamaican household, when we heard Boogie Down Productions, KRS-One drop. We didn't even use the word drop back then, but when The Bridge Is Over came out, and I was like blown away. I think I was like 5 or 6, and I was like, oh my God, and just being like, hearing somebody who sounded like that, hearing KRS-One, and then like, buddy bye bye. And I'm like, oh my God. Yeah, all of that was new. It was so cutting edge. And my brothers with their big boom boxes walking down the street and just like blasting that sound that reflected back to us who we were. It was wild. It was wild.
Well, see, that era is the reason why our company is called KBX Media. It's why it's called Killer Boombox. So the idea was, and like if I was coming out with a media company today in my 20s, it would probably be named something completely different because it's a complete different aspect. But the boombox is kind of almost a symbol of that energy, that time, that perspective. And I tell my story of like, so I was born here in Boston, and what I would do, I would go back and forth between Boston and New Jersey, where my family is from. So my family is like Trenton, Princeton, Lawrenceville, like all in that area. So I was born here, moved down there, lived there for a while, and then moved back here. And then my family would frequently, maybe about once a month, would go back to New Jersey. So my cousin, who's around my age, is a couple of years older than me, that was probably my main person I hung with. So in our family, we really didn't have a whole bunch of friends. We had friends outside our family, but most of our family, like, we were super close. So our cousins were like our brothers and sisters. We all grew up relatively close to each other. So I would go, and when I would go, I'd be at his house. I'd be in his room before he came home from school or work or whatever. And in my mind, I remember going and visiting him and remembering his boombox. I remember the first time I heard King of Rock by Run DMC. Like, when I hear that song, I hear the cuts and the scratches that Red Alert did on the radio when he was on Kiss, when he played the record. Like, that's instantly, I don't hear anything else but that when I hear that song. And then, for me, we talked about the kind of driver of hip hop. And for me, it also was a gateway and connection. So you talked about Boogie Down Production. So for me, hip hop taught me, or it opened the door for me to go learn about reggae. Because I'm like, where's that energy? What he's doing on this song is not just here. Where else is this? And then I would go and explore and find other things. When I would hear Gangstar and I hear these, or Tribe Called Quest, I'm like, well, wait a minute, where are these sounds coming from? Because I understood the concept of sampling. What are they getting from? So that's where I would go. Same thing with like George Clinton and Parliament Funkadelic. All my musical tastes broadened from the hip hop that I was listening to, because I was always curious about what was the genesis of this music that they were creating, and where was it coming from. So when I went to go hear the original, I'm like, oh, because I'm trying to figure out how they're putting this puzzle together. So if I go look at the pieces that they pulled, now I can get a better understanding, and you know what I mean? So it was just me being a super nerd and being always curious, but the effect of that was a development of a love for all musical genres.
So you two are both mentioning the sound of hip hop, And we haven't yet talked about the message of hip hop, because when hip hop started, a lot of times, if it wasn't on the radio, it would be passed around on these mixtapes you would buy on the street. So I remember going to New York, going to Washington Heights and a couple of places uptown, and people would be selling these tapes on the street for like $5 or $3 or something. And that's how I got hip hop sometimes, going to another city, a bigger city like New York or DC, and getting the music and bringing it back to Boston. And of course, the sound was appealing. The sound was different. The sound was powerful in ways that, we hadn't heard before that. But the message also was important too. There's one, and Greg, you can probably remember the title of the song. There's this one song that has a lyric that I remember when I think about hip hop in the 80s, where the person says, "Rap Master Ronnie got some cheese for you." And I thought that was so shocking, actually. I don't know if you remember that song, but I was just so shocked that someone was actually commenting on a president in such a direct way, and in a way that was sort of just dismissive in a way. And then, when hip hop became a little bit more mainstream, or at least I should say when Spike Lee made it a little bit more mainstream through his movies, we have movies like Do the Right Thing, where Public Enemy and Fight the Power, began to amplify the message of resistance a little bit more. So, just as I'm thinking about hip hop, I'm thinking about the message a little bit more than the sound of it. And I'm just curious to hear what you guys think about how the message sort of impacted our generation.
Well, I mean, when I think about the impact, first I would take a couple steps back. I would say the real first kind of breakthrough, making people pay attention out of the Black and Latino communities, was probably the Sugar Hill Gang with
That's the message.
Yeah, and with Rapper's Delight, and and then you go with Grandmaster Flash and the Furious Five with the message. And I think that, so I always think people always try to pinpoint it to a thing, and I think what it is it ends up actually being a wave. So it's the things that built up to that point. So when you said the thing about your point about Spike Lee and Do the Right Thing, I think that was the end point of a wave that had been grown. Like almost like, I'll give you an example of something completely different. The WNBA. Everybody's all excited about the WNBA now, but there's like 5 different things that have happened over the last 4 years that have gotten us to the point where right now everybody's paying attention, and now it can make that leap. You know what I mean? Similar to the NBA, there was the rivalry between the Celtics and the Celtics and the Lakers with Magic and Bird, that got everything primed up so that when there could be a space for a Michael Jordan.
Yes.
So those things kind of build. So when you talk about the message piece, I think those are, the messaging and those things have always been there. Like, just like we were saying from the very beginning, these things have always been there because people are telling the stories that are interesting around the life that they're living. You know what I mean? So I think that we've always seen that, and that message has always been there. I think that even today, there are artists who have a message in their music. What happened in our current landscape, I think, is that messaging is not necessarily in the mainstream music that we're hearing on the radio and we're hearing in other places. And I think there's a lot of reasons for that. I think part of it, I'm not a conspiracy theorist in the sense that I think there's somebody sitting behind a desk with a handlebar mustache, twisting the ends of the mustache, thinking about how they're going to destroy us. But I think what happens is people go where the money is.
Yeah.
And people go where things are where they can understand things. So it is difficult to easily connect to the sensitivity of a record. Like Common did a record years ago with him and Lauryn Hill, where he tells a story about how he was in love with his girlfriend and how she got pregnant and they were faced with the choice of her having an abortion. Right? Not a catchy song. You know what I mean? But at the time, he had the biggest star in music, Lauryn Hill, singing the chorus of it. and it's a valid, real, raw record, and it's a beautiful song. But that's not necessarily something that you want to hear, 10 times a day on your jamming 94.5. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So I think that what people gravitate towards are things that are easy for them to catch on to, for them to connect with. And then also, I think that people, when you get into mainstream spaces, people connect with the things that they think are there, or we are, you know what I mean? Or what they've been told that we are. You know what I mean? So I think that there's an element of current hip hop, particularly the stuff that's really fascinated with like gang culture in LA and Chicago. I think there's a voyeurism that's going on within all of that, because that stuff reinforces and proves something that that's been pushed in the mainstream in terms of who we are and what we are. So it's easier to connect with like 50 Cent, you know what I mean? Because that's what you've been told about.
Well, it's a caricature.
Yeah, and exactly.
In that you can make money off of that. I mean, part of what I'm thinking about, I'm still somehow going back to the sound. I think the message is also in the sound. Like what we're talking about is that hip hop, rap, the formation of rap was our version of the blues. We're showing an ache. And I think I can't think about it. We could talk all day about how it's now more commodified and commercialized and poppy and all of that. But to me, hip hop always is the roots, the thing that hurt. And that's what made us feel recognized and gave us sort of the gumption to talk about problems, to talk about how effed up things were, because hip hop was also reflecting what was happening, as you say, Greg, what was happening in the streets, which was increasing mass incarceration. And honestly, the influx of crack, like that, all of us grew up with that in the 80s on the street, crack vials on the street. Mm-hmm. And, I didn't grow up in projects, but I grew up near enough to projects that I could see the devastation. And so that's in the music. I don't care what gets spun these days. That is in what Nas is talking about all the way back. So I feel like that's to me, that's what's relevant to think about what we hold on to and what that tells us, like how it's formed our constitution, about what we see as possible as Gen Xers, as people who are at a point where we can make decisions in industry, in politics right now.
Yeah, I think.
But I don't think that we can ignore. Sorry, Greg. I didn't mean to cut you off, but Melanie, I don't think we can ignore where we are now either. So I agree with what you're saying, the crack era, the mass incarceration era, which is not really over, did force a shaping of how the Black community in the US sees itself and thinks about itself in some ways. But when we have people like Jay-Z, I'm going to put some images up, Jay-Z hanging out with Obama, and then the other one, which you don't like, with Ye hanging out with Trump. I mean, there's a broader sense here in terms of like what it looks like for our generation and for people who listen to hip hop to be existing now. Like the concept, the idea and the vision has broadened in a way that I don't think anybody had thought about. I mean, just like most people hadn't thought about having a Black president as a reality in our lifetimes happened. I don't think people really thought about having a person like Ye or Jay-Z hanging out with presidents was something that people really thought about either. So I think that the view is much bigger now than just where we were 30 years ago.
But has our access and our power widened? That's what I'm curious about. I mean, I can't not think about that when we were teeing up to start this episode, and this is on everyone's mind in some way or another. And Greg just happened to say, "Oh, what are you seeing as a challenge in real estate industry?" But I mean, if you're talking about Boston, it's like, well, people who don't come from resource, the ground is slipping from under them and their ability to hold on to neighborhoods that defined not only their experience, but define the formation of hip hop. Right? We could talk about culture all day, but that's also a production. Culture is a production that capitalism fuels. And what I'm asking is, how much is that coming back to us in resource and economic power, in actually ownership of place, ownership of the stakes, you know.
Well, I think it's interesting because I don't think that it is coming back to us, but I also think part of it is because there's a constantly changing wave of like everything's moving all the time. So just when we get comfortable with one thing, this whole new thing pops up and flips everything upside down. And we're talking about I was telling you guys about the lens, about how I look at hip hop as the lens that I look at the world with. And part of that was like, so for me, Jay-Z is one of my favorite rappers, but because he is a snapshot of that energy of that era. So
yeah,
there are folks who have never sold drugs in their life, but that energy of that time, that thought process, the way that we approach things, that drive comes from that. So even if you weren't outside, doing that, you still grew up in that time where it was like, yo, we got to go get it. Because you got to think, the public enemies of the world were created in reaction to the watching the children of the 70s get enamored with the proximity to power.
Yeah.
And hip hop is always about kind of speaking truth to power.
Critique. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's always been pushing like, wait a minute, that's not right. Let's do that. Nah, let's not approach that. And it changes so much because look at this stuff that people do today as a regular course of business, being part of culture or being part of the industry that they would have gotten slayed for in 89.
Yeah.
Like we raked poor MC Hammer over the coals because he did some of those deals, because he made Skechers sneakers, and the popcorn chicken was a little bit out of control. But those things that we really kind of critiqued at that time, now we laud people for doing those things. The very same things that we criticized him for are the very same things that we stand up and say that Jay-Z is the greatest thing since sliced bread for. But what's also changed is our understanding of using or working within capitalism to survive.
Yeah.
So the one thing the crack era came is it basically, which is a residual effect of the heroin era, was the anti-hero, the idea of the drug dealer as the anti-hero, because you weren't necessarily endorsing the use of drugs. You were endorsing the freedom that the money gave you, or the money that you saw people get from the money.
And against all odds. All odds.
I think that we face, I think, like I said, each era has a different understanding and connection. So when you think of like 85 to 89, during that time, you're thinking Eric B. and Rakim, you're thinking Public Enemy, you're thinking Big Daddy Kane. There was almost a requirement to have a level of consciousness within what you were doing. Even the original, it's the second, but everybody looks at it as the debut NWA album, Straight Outta Compton. There was a political undertone to like fuck the police. You know what I mean? It wasn't just because. Subsequently, when Cube left the group, that left with him. But the whole idea of rebellion against the system that is not working towards our benefit is really kind of the driving force. And even today, that is the foundation is like, this is not fitting me.
Uh-huh.
I need to figure out how to make this work and how to survive. When I listen to hip hop, whatever generation it is, I always think of it's almost a trauma response. You know what I mean? I think the music is a trauma response. And what's happening is you're seeing the things that are pushing, the buttons that people are being pushed for each generation. So you look at like Drake, right? You know, Drake to me is the perfect MC for a generation that grew up with their entire life on the internet, with their entire interaction socially and everything on the internet. You're always worried about what people think about you. You don't want to get played. You know, listen, the beautiful part about growing up at my time, this is what old people say. Now I'm sounding old. The beautiful part about growing up in my time is I could go to a party, see a beautiful girl across the room, go over there and talk to her, get rejected, completely rejected, and then I can live to go and survive another day. But here in this generation, you slide in the DM, she done screenshotted it, put it on her main page, she done tagged you on her Facebook post and all types. You know what I'm saying? Like, you can't take your L in quiet. You can't take your L in peace. So when you are living in under that microscope at all times, your interaction, the way you act is completely different. It's one of the reasons why I feel like there's a mob mentality on the internet. People wait until it's popular to dislike you to start to jump out and dislike you. Whereas previous generations, I ain't like you. That's it. I'm not waiting for everybody else to be your friend, or if it's, well, we should all still be his friend. No, I don't like him. I'm not going. You know what I'm saying? I'm not going to hang over there.
Well, now you're making me think of that song, Why Can't We Just Be Friends? But I want to speak to a slightly larger piece here around image, because you're mentioning MC Hammer and the Popcorn Chicken versus Jay-Z and what he's doing, capitalism, and then this bit around, you know, an older bit of Gen X can do a certain thing and not be embarrassed, but a younger cohort might be. But just speaking about image generally, and getting back to MC Hammer and Jay-Z. So do you think part of the reason that people raked MC Hammer over the coals, specifically around Popcorn Chicken, was because it plays to stereotypes, versus Jay-Z starting a business, a multi-billion-dollar business, that where he shapes the image, he makes the decision, he's the driver, versus MC Hammer sort of being dragged along? Or is that too simplistic?
I think that's a part of it. I absolutely believe that's a piece of it. But I also think there was a different level of understanding about interaction with larger entities in business.
Yeah.
So you I think we're still coming out of the 60s and 70s where it's really about, yo, this entire power structure needs to be burned down. You know what I mean? You got to think about this. So that was the energy that what people were on. So when Hammer comes up in the 80s and he's literally dancing for chicken, of course he's going to catch it. You know what I mean? Of course he's going to catch an L. It's not going to work. We're not standing for that. And the fact that y'all think it's okay makes me wonder about you too. You know what I mean? So that was the energy around it. Whereas later on with Jay-Z, and it's interesting because Jay-Z kind of almost took us along the ride with him through his music. Talking the creation of his own company because no one would sign him. Yes. Talking about like those things were there. So it was almost like he was teaching us. And then there were other people that we started to see the moguls that just started to come into play. So when you started to see, you know, Rough Riders or Bad Boy or all these groups that were taking ownership and driving their own stories, it was a completely different interaction. Because I think that you're correct. It was a difference because we felt like he was. I think the sentiment would be for Hammer that he was not in the driver's seat in those situations. And I think part of it was we also didn't have all the different ways to interact and find out about what was going on along that time. You know, I mean, I would be, now in retrospect, I would be hard pressed. I think that was a poor decision, the KFC endorsement, but I would be hard pressed to criticize a guy who grew up in Oakland about his blackness. Not to say that he's infallible or whatever, but if you get to know that city and understand the energy and that what Oakland is about, when you kind of know where he's coming from or what that space is, and who he was as a person, which were all things that we didn't know until later on. You know what I mean? The criticism probably was right at the time based on the optics. Like, you can do the deal with KFC, but do the deal a different way. You know what I mean? But it's also during that time, that's how people sold stuff.
Right.
You were a football player. What do? I have you run through the airport, dodging people on your way, you know what I mean? On your way to catch your plane or get your rent-a-car. You see what I'm saying? Or if you're a rapper and you're known for dancing, I'm going to have you in this video dancing so people recognize, and boom, there we are. So that was also another piece of it as well. You look at commercials today, you don't always see the person doing the thing that you know them for.
But it does sound like what you're saying is we become more sophisticated in how to cultivate and leverage our own image and images and create wealth from that. And I'm wondering, because you also talked to us in our initial conversation, Greg, do you feel that ties into an analysis about what comes after you? You know, that you could become sophisticated, you could build something to pass on, which Jay-Z and Beyonce both do talk about, creating legacy, that you actually train this newer generation who comes after you, who's going to receive things from you, how to handle it, how to master it, how to control it so that you don't lose it, so that we're not starting over from scratch every new generation, that there's some kind of knowledge, intellectual capital, wisdom, resource that can be controlled and channeled to the next generation.
Well, I think that the landscape has changed in the sense that people are being very mindful to not make the mistakes of the past. So when you hear people say, you know, when you hear JC say a line, I'm overcharging them for what they did to the Cold Crush, he's being mindful. I know how they screwed us over in the past.
Yes.
And no one wants to be taken advantage of. And, you know, the thing I tell people is that every hip hop song you've ever heard about is about the same thing, no matter what it is. Whether it's Akinelli, Put It in Your Mouth, to Lauryn Hill, Zion, they're all about the same thing, and it's power.
Yeah.
It's really about the advocating for yourself and personal power. The difference is what each person thinks is powerful. You know, what makes you powerful. And I think that what we've seen is we've seen more people get a better understanding of how to control their image. And then also you're seeing people take advantage of that and really kind of dig in their heels. And there's more avenues for them to open up the opportunities to control their own narratives. So if you're a kid now and you're 20 years old, if you and 3 or 4 of your friends are dedicated, you might be able to get yourself rocking and making enough money so that you don't have to deal with any major labels. Look at Jordan Lucas from Worcester, Mass. He didn't rush to go get some major record deal. He didn't need to. He built up his platform and was incredible, and he knew how to play the internet. And now he's headlining a tour. Currently, right now, he's headlining a tour across the country, and he's going to be in the new Will Smith movie. He's in Bad Boys 4. Listen, he started off independent and stayed independent. So there's ways and there's aspects that allow the artist to kind of go direct to consumer, which opens up the opportunity for them to not necessarily have to fall into the trap of, you know, what other people's idea are. Now, there's also the other side of that is there are also people who are in particular dire straits. You know, any business deal always comes from, you know, always boils down to who needs to do this more.
Yep.
So if I am, you know, a 6'10" kid and I got a jump shot, but I'm one of the best players in the country, but my parents don't need my money or don't need me to become an NBA player in order for us to live a good life. My interaction and connection and approach to making my choices as a player is completely different than the person who not only has to lift himself, but his immediate family and maybe his extended family out of poverty.
Yeah.
I actually want to go back a couple of steps because this episode is hip hop and Gen X. And a couple of things the two of you said have made me kind of wonder two divergent thoughts. So, and hopefully I still remember both of them, but one is hip hop leaving Gen X behind?
Mhm.
So hip hop has, started, like I said, it started in someone's basement in the Bronx. Now it's a multi-billion-dollar business with artists meeting presidents and traveling the world. But is our generation really, have we as a generation, and it's hard to say because again, there's so many of us, have we as a generation, have we grown? Have we been able to achieve that? Because, Greg, you said earlier that part of the energy behind hip hop was about acquiring wealth and generating wealth. And, I forget the exact word you said, but, really the
Aspiration?
the aspiration for it.
Yeah.
Yes. And so do we still have that aspiration?
Yeah.
And, Greg, you also said that, folks like Jay-Z are teaching us, they have been teaching us over the course of so many years of their career. Have we learned those lessons? And if so, what are they? And how have we enacted them?
Mm.
What's interesting? I do think some of us have learned those lessons, but again, it goes to what I was just saying. It's about your position to be able to take advantage of those lessons. It's about your plan to be able to take it. Do you have even the resources to start on a small level to build to the next level? I think those are all kind of things that really get in the way. I think, as great as the internet is and how much, just like I said, it helps to level the playing field, it morphs, it changes. And, before there was, the early days of the internet, the blog era, you really had an opportunity to really just jump out there. And before the majors even knew, you were already on your way. Now they're in the middle of that as well. So everybody's fighting for those same pieces of real estate. You just have to get smart about how you do it. But I think that we do have, it's split. I look at people and I see them doing all the right things and they understand how to build and create for themselves. But then also I see artists who are still falling and getting into the same situations and traps that they were before. And, I say that technology is the greatest thing and the worst thing in the world sometimes, because if you're not paying attention, it will fool you into thinking that everything is very easy. You can be on Instagram and watch some of these real estate gurus and feel like you are the dumbest person in the world. And why don't you have 5 Lambos? Because they have 7. You could have done what they were doing. And, needless to say, all of that stuff is smoke and mirrors. And the way that some of those people make their money is selling you the course on how to go do what they didn't do. But people, it's difficult for people kind of to see through that. So I think that, yes, we are in a better place. I think people have a better understanding. I think there's more opportunities. And you're not just seeing it in the world of hip hop, you're seeing it in the world of media as a whole. You're seeing, look at ESPN, for example. ESPN has drastically changed from where it was 4 years ago, 5 years ago. The biggest thing on ESPN is the Pat McAfee show, which is a show that he created and built from the internet. And then they felt they needed to get involved with him and wrote him a substantial check to do so. The biggest personality on ESPN is Stephen A. Smith. And, between Pat McAfee and Stephen A. Smith, they run the building. You know what I mean? They run the building, but part of it is they understand the current landscape.
Will hip hop sell us out? Because again, I go back to that image of Kanye with Trump. Will the capitalistic instinct supersede the anything else? So in order for me to survive, I might need to, not me, but like in order for hip hop to survive or for artists to survive, will they say capitalism is worked for me this far? And if it means I need to cut myself off at a certain point and, leave the original backers, the original people of hip hop behind to do so, I will do that.
I think people will leave us behind. I don't necessarily think hip hop will leave us behind. And I actually think we're at a watershed moment right now, because I think so. I believe music and culture as a whole is reflective of the space and the people, the reflective of the people in the space that they're in, right? And I think more and more we're getting to a point where our frustration with the world is going to start creeping into the culture that we create. I don't think they're going to be mutually exclusive. I'm actually very interested to see how this happens, because, early on, like we go back to the early days, we talk about Hammer and other artists, but when other artists were starting to ascend and break out of kind of the usual spaces of hip hop, when you had a Tone Loc or you had a young MC or whatever, we would kind of look at them and raise an eyebrow, like, what are you doing to go over there to try to curry their favor? You know what I mean? But people are making the records that are reflective of the lives that they're living. I think we're at a point where we're going to start seeing people make something that's reflective of the life that they want to live and that they're living. I think that there's going to be a point where, we're going to start to push back. We're starting to see people push back or having a desire to have something of more substance within the music, or not even more substance, of a different substance in the music. I think this whole back and forth with Drake and Drake was an example of that. I think that was a real, like, that is, Drake is going to be fine. He will be a billionaire and he will be okay. But I do think that is an example to show that there is a space for lyricism. There's a space for different sonics. It's a space for all those things that we kind of associated with hip hop. I think there's a space for all those things still. And I think we're going to see more and more people who are going to push that envelope and go in that direction. So do I think that hip hop will sell us out? No. I think there are people who have sold us out and will sell us out, because I think there's a lot of people who are fascinated with the proximity to power. You know what I mean? When I look at that picture of Kanye and Trump, I see, that desire to have a proximity to power. You know what I mean? And I think that it's crazy to me when I hear anybody in support of Trump that comes from a marginalized community. Like, you do know that once he's done with whoever it is that you don't like, he's coming after you next.
Well, he's already using you.
Yes, I think he's already using you, and I don't understand how you don't understand that you're being used, or that he's coming after you. That he's we've seen this movie before. You know what I mean? Which is one of the reasons why I think that it's so imperative for there to be a level of solidarity within marginalized groups, but then also within the diaspora. Don't think because some of the most well-educated Black people in America are from the continent, who are people who have immigrated, who come to school or whatever, that he's not going to not come after you too.
Yeah.
It's not about you, it's about your usefulness. It is not about you. You are not special. Just like I'm not special because my family is rooted in the American South. Just like somebody else isn't special because their family is from Jamaica. We are in this together. If it was a Jamaican, an American, a Trini, and a Bayesian in a car, and they pull us over and they say, "You niggas get out," then they're talking to all of us. They are talking to all four of us.
True and true. True and true.
We gotta. So for me, I think so. We talk about hip hop. For me, that was the other beautiful thing about the culture and the music. For me, it was that bridge for me to connect and understand other people and other cultures within Blackness. So you can't divorce hip hop from its Afro-Latin roots. You see what I'm saying? So now I'm kicking it with the Dominicans and the Puerto Ricans because we have this commonality. You know what I mean? Now you can't get it away from the Jamaicans because the Jamaicans is the root of it. So you
That's
got to go. You have to have them involved. Boom.
Yeah.
So now you doing with that. Then
Yeah.
you got the rest of the Caribbean. So you see what I'm saying? And then you got people who are connected to Africa. So when I'm looking and connecting it, yes, the hip hop is what brought us all to the table. And I don't think there's anything wrong with being culturally proud. I think that there is definitely a power in our respective spaces being proud of being a proud Jamaican, being a proud Nigerian or whatever. But I also don't think it is healthy, it is smart as a strategy for us to kind of think that we are any one of us, whether it's Americans, whether it's whoever, that we are the special Negroes. Because trust and believe, we have seen this movie before. Just because you went to Harvard does not mean they like you. They like you enough, and that it allows certain people to make their conscience be a little bit easier at night or whatever. They can sleep or whatever before, so they can feel like they're not racist. But trust and believe, overall, this entire power structure will at one point or another and be like, okay, your turn. So, and now I'll even go further than that. Even white folks, he gonna get y'all too. If y'all are poor, if you are not of resource, if he thinks you are not of value, or
if you can be hoodwinked and manipulated.
Yes.
But can I ask? I think maybe one final question, because much of our conversation today has been about the individual aspiration, getting out of dire circumstance, going and get it, you know. But then you also said something just a bit ago, Greg, about understanding the landscape, and I'm continually trying to think about what have we learned as a generation from how hip hop has evolved and how it's evolved in us and how we've evolved because of being influenced by this culture. So what can we leave with in our own understanding of the landscape? I think one of those things is understanding our connectivity to each other and our dependence on each other. But can you say, like, what does it mean right now in a way that is beneficial for us and our peoples, to understand the landscape?
Well, I mean, I think our current landscape is along the lines of what we were just talking about, is we're in this together. We have to look towards one another and lean into our connectivity. So one of the beautiful parts about being a Bostonian, in addition to our winning sports teams, unlike those bum ass Knicks, one of the beautiful parts about being a Bostonian is that as a Black Bostonian, you are part of one of the most diverse Black population in the country. So you have your folks from the Caribbean, you have your folks from South America and from Latin America, you have your folks from the continent. And I think the very thing that normally and has in some cases in the past kept us apart from each other is the exact thing that we can use to build and be great. So if we take, one of the things that I hear sometimes in our diaspora wars, beyond Jollof rice wars, in the diaspora wars, is about how American Blacks do not have culture, right? That's something that people have frequently said throughout the diaspora, which is insane to me, because they're saying it to you while dressing in the clothes of African Americans and with the sensibility and slang of African Americans, but not trying to get into that space right now. My point is, we're all in this together and we all have something to draw from. So if I can draw from the resilience of and a sheer will and determination of Haitian folks, right? And I can put that with the connection and the passion and the love of Jamaican people, you know what I mean? And I could put, you know what I mean? If I could take all those bits and pieces from all of our experiences and put it together, and we are concentrated on working together, then I feel like we're unstoppable. And then the other piece is whoever wants to come and rock with us. I think many times when we have conversations around DEI, they're really framed around us going into spaces of whiteness, right? But to me, real inclusion means you come over to my house for dinner too. You see what I'm saying? And you go, before you get to my house, you deal with whatever it is that you got going on that makes you nervous about coming to my neighborhood, that makes you whatever it is, or you come in and you operate and be a part of our collective, and we're all in it together. You see what I'm saying? So I think that, like I was saying about Boston, I think that we are in a very unique space. Embrace Boston was a part, along with the Boston Indicators, of doing a study last year called The Great Migration to the Great Immigration. And it's about the makeup, the black makeup of Black Boston, the makeup of Black Boston within the metropolitan area. And when I looked at the numbers and kind of read and realized about whether Afro Latinos, whether it's continent, whether it's the rest of the Caribbean, I'm like, yo, we have everything we need. We have everything we need. Where in other places around the country is more homogenous. You know what I mean? So you're getting bits and pieces of certain communities, but the larger community, maybe based from folks that have roots connected to the American South. We have the entire diaspora in here, and we have the ability to build those bridges and connections. And, and when we build and do what we're doing, I think that opens up the opportunity for other people to come to the table with us, because we've built it, and we built it on our viewpoints and views. So when you're coming to the table, we're not coming to the table with our hand out. We're coming to the table and offering you a plate. And that's a completely different energy than when, you know what I mean? It is completely different energy in a conversation. And I think we have the ability to do that. I think we have that. And I think that when we talk about, hip hop and Gen X, I think that to me is kind of the beautiful part of where hip hop is now. So the one thing that Drake becoming a superstar did was it moved the focus of the culture out of the United States. It made us, it was always a global phenomenon, but it made you being from, some backwater place in the middle of Florida, it made that seem real, because if he can make it from there, I can make it. And it globalized it, and it made people see beyond just America. And I think that is a beautiful thing, because it also gives us the opportunity for us to build connections and relationships beyond America.
I mean, the one thing that I was thinking about when you said, the diasporas in Boston, it goes back to what we were saying earlier, is can they afford to stay? So then that's the piece too. It's like, yeah, we're all here, but can we afford to stay in order to build those bridges and create the type of future and the type of community that we want to create?
To stay and to be able to convene, because I'm hearing you talk so much about technology, Greg, and I'm like, yeah, but you still need on the ground interrelations, like you talked about going to your cousins' houses, right? That you still need neighborhoods where people can converge and thrive together and share ideas together. And if that is being interrupted because it's harder to afford to pay rent in these neighborhoods, then our identity of the urban neighborhood is also changing. And maybe some of this migration is outward from the city and it's happening elsewhere. But yeah, I'm sitting with the same question, Derek, about like, okay, well, where does that happen? Where physically does that happen?
Well, I mean, I think that happens in a variety of different ways. I'm fortunate to be blessed. I'm fortunate and blessed to be a part of two organizations that I think that are challenging and pushing towards that, of that creation of space that you're talking about. So it was intentional for the Embrace Monument to be on Boston Common. Yes, it could have been put in other parts of the city. It could have been put in the middle of a Roxbury or wherever, but being put on Boston Common was done for a couple of reasons. One, it allows us to pay homage to one of the original Black neighborhoods in the city of Boston, which is Beacon Hill. And then the other part of it is, by placing that monument on the Freedom Trail, it forces people who are coming to Boston to learn the city of America to see the symbol of Black love right in the middle of the city, and creating space for us all in the middle of the city. You know, people would frequently say, I don't have a reason to go down there. Well, now you do. Now you have a reason to go down there. There's more and more things going on in Boston in that space that we need to be mindful of and be trying to get ourselves to. So that's something that is important. And the other part of it is, for me, is my work with BAMS Fest is really about doing a large scale music festival in the middle of the Black community at Franklin Park.
Yeah.
You know, that is something that BAMS Fest isn't the first group to do that. That was done by Elma Lewis with Uptown in the Park, in the 70s, where she had essentially the top Black music groups of the day all in the middle of White Stadium for 10,000 people.
Wow, I didn't know.
We're talking about a concert that was Confunction, Parliament Funkadelic, Graham Central Station, and hosted by Richard Pryor. So that's like, that's the equivalent for some folks who may not know those names. That's like Kevin Hart being the host, Drake, Kendrick, and Beyonce showing up. Like, that was what happened in the middle of our neighborhood. So the idea of creating that space is something that's super important. And, you're right. We do need to be together. That's one of the reasons why we do the BAMS Fest and what we do with Embrace. And that's one of the reasons why we do the Embrace Ideas Festival, is to create those spaces. Mm-hmm. The thing that I'm worried about, like everyone, is, like you said, this flight of people from the city. What can we do to make it affordable, where people are not living on top of each other? There's so many things that come from the economic dire straits that we're in. You may end up being in a relationship longer than you want to because you can't afford to move out. You know what I mean? There's all types of stuff. So we need to alleviate some of this pressure, because and it's interesting, because when you're under that level of pressure, you can't think.
Yeah.
Well, you're obsessed with surviving. You're obsessed with trying to live. And it's very hard to try to convince people, hey, take the second from actually existing and surviving to figure out this plan on how we can thrive.
But I think that takes us back to the beginning of this episode, which is, that's what formed hip hop, was that desperation, frankly. It's like these kids were like, I'm not going to be able to afford to buy books for the start of the school year. Let's throw a party, right? Like, the buildings around them were burning. Their parents weren't earning enough money to even get them ready for the next school year. That's desperation. So, are we going, have we evolved past that? And on a community level, can we be in a space of thriving? And how can we be together enough to experience thriving? I think, these are just the questions of where I think we're all sitting with.
I think part of that comes from those people that are the connectors.
Yeah.
So it is the people who, whether they recognize it themselves or somebody recognizes it about them, that are the conveners, who are the people who, I know somebody from over here and I know somebody from over there. You guys may not know each other. Let me bring you guys together so we can figure out what we can do together. I think that more than ever, we need those funnels and those places and spaces where we can bring people together so they can realize that each other's there. Because as much as we have the internet and we have the ability to connect with one another, the interesting part is the technology really forces, it does not necessarily allow you to venture into new things, because it's focused on keeping you interested in the things that you've shown that you're interested in.
So far, yeah.
So if I like Derek's page is going to find me 10 more people just like Derek, as opposed to the one or two other people who may have enough in common with Derek, but they're different enough that we have something to have a conversation and a bridge about. You know what I mean? Or they're different and we don't know. We're looking at these almost avatars of ourselves and using those to connect with one another. But, you know, we need those opportunities to connect with each other in person, because in person is where you start to learn and develop and connect, and you know, you're part of the reality of where we're at, as opposed to the presentation of where we're at.
Thank you. Lovely.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it. We appreciate all the insights, and clearly you have so much more to tell us. So we will have to think about another topic to have you back in the future.
Well, listen, I'm open anytime you want. Just let me know, and I am there.
Thank you so much. And for those of you who are watching, if you have questions or comments, please feel free to leave them in the comment field of whatever platform you're watching us on. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your favorite episode or all the episodes with the people you know. And we will see you next time on the Black Lightning Forum. Take care, everyone.